Welcome to BAL, Building Athletic Lifestyles. I'm Neil. This is part 3 of the Fundamentals series. If you missed part 1 or 2, there will be a link down below where you can find those videos first. Try to watch them before you come to this one. We do build on these principles brick by brick as we go. Progression, I've broken it down on the right hand side for you here. So starting off with the said principle, specific adaptions to imposed demands is what that stands for. Essentially, if you're subjecting your body to a stimulus, we adapt to that stimulus. It's one of those underarching themes of why we actually get fitter as you train, or stronger, or whatever it may be, whatever that stimulus is that you adapt to. A huge part of making progress is progressive overload. So changing that stimulus over time as you adapt to it, making sure that that stimulus is still challenging enough that your body has to make a change. Keeping it gym based. Most people tend to think about either doing a heavier weight or doing more reps at a certain weight. You can actually be quite creative with what method you use to get that progressive overload. So just to break it down for you, if you're going to do weight, it would mean that, say, when you're in the gym itself, you're doing 100 kilos on your squat. Next time you're trying to aim for 102.5. Yeah, that stimulus goes up over time. You're just adding more and more weight. Reps. Say you're doing 3 sets of 10, then you're going to work in a rep range where you're going to build up to 3 sets of 12. Keep the same weight, but you're just looking to do more volume by adding extra reps on each and every session. In terms of getting a little bit more creative, you've got efficiency as well. So if you're moving the same amount of weight for the same number of reps, but you're moving it in a shorter time period, by that I mean cutting down your rest period, something like that. So if you're resting a minute and a half between sets, then you break that down to a minute and 15 instead, and working through that way. Also quite good if you're looking to speed up your workouts. Last one, exertion. So how hard you're actually working for each and every rep. So for this one, you keep the weight and the reps the same, but instead slow the tempo. So instead of doing a 2-second lowering phase, you do a 3-second lowering phase. Yeah, more time under tension is just a bigger stimulus, a bigger challenge for the muscles itself. So one thing to cover here is training age. So that's something that Eric Helms, that I mentioned in part 1. I'll also put his video down below as well, where you can have a look at that. He's done a couple of pretty good studies on it, just to show that actually the stage you are in your training, what they call the age, will impact how much progression you make. So starting off with beginner, if you're fresh into starting doing some weights, you'd expect to make some pretty big changes. But that's because this stimulus, coming back to the start, is very different to what you're used to. So you're making big adaptations quickly to accommodate for this huge change. The more you train, the smaller that change in stimulus is. So with beginners, you tend to do a lot of micro-loading, which is essentially week on week or workout on workout. You're adding on extra weight. So say you came in and you were doing a leg press, machine assisted leg press, something like that to start off with, and you were on 35 kilos to start off with. The next time you come in, you're up to 37.5. Same number of reps, but you're actually just adding that, whatever the smallest increment of weight is, adding that as you go. Might be 2.5 kilos, might be 1 kilo, whatever the increment is, the smallest increment, you're adding that each and every time that you do an exercise. Good intermediates. So this tends to bring it a little further across. If this is sort of like the 6 months to 2 year mark, then you're looking at using through rep ranges. So you're looking for progress week on week. You're not going to see so much progress between workout and workout, but instead between that slightly larger scale of every week, you're looking to make some degree of progress. What works quite well, and this is something I've used a lot in practice too, is to use rep ranges. So say you're aiming for a given weight to be between 6 to 8 reps. You start off, that was 6 to 8 by the way, not 68. So going back to what we said at the start with the squat, 100 kilos, if you're aiming for 6 reps to start off with, you keep the 100 kilos until you're hitting 8 reps for each set. Yeah, so say it was 3 by 6, first time you did it you got 7, 7, 6. You'd stick with that weight until you're getting 8, 8 and 8. Then you'd bump the weight up, even if it meant that you would now doing 102.5 for 6, 6 and 6. Stick with that until you're doing 102.5 for 8, 8 and 8 in each set, and then that's your progression. That's a linear progression there in terms of building it up as you go. It works quite well with intermediates. It tends to work better on compound movements than isolation movements. The rep ranges will just shift for if you're doing, difference between a squat and a bicep curl. I'm not suggesting you go super heavy on your bicep curls and try and crank out some sets of 6. You might be working on a different rep range there, something like 8 to 12. So advanced gets much more towards the fine tuning end now. This is anyone that's been training for over 2 years. Most common methods of assessment are a 1 rep max. So that's just your maximal lift you can do. If that's not really your aim, your goal, if it's not about strength for you, then you've got AMRAP, as many reps as possible. In terms of advanced, lifters, you're expected to see progress more between month and month as opposed to week on week. Whether you pick a 1 rep max or whether you pick an AMRAP is dependent largely on your goals. Obviously, strength orientated, you're probably going to want to do a 1 rep max. That's just as heavy as you can possibly do for a single rep. You want to test that every 6 to 12 weeks, something like that. In terms of AMRAP, as many reps as possible. If you were looking in terms of hypertrophy, building muscle, doing it every 8 weeks, doing a check-in and saying, 100 kilos or whatever percentages you based off of your last training cycle, whatever that number you pick is, just as many as you can do until you hit failure. Over time, you'd expect to see that progress, and then each and every time you test it, that is your baseline to work your next program off of. Perfect. The last thing I just want to mention down here as well is periodization. It's a big part of a lot of what I do in terms of programming for people. It's more to do with making sure that your progression throughout a cycle is appropriate, but also that you've got necessary rest periods as well. There's a whole plethora of different models you can use, and it will depend a lot on the athlete as well as your personal preferences, what works. So I'll pop a link down to a study that, again, Eric Helms has done with a number of other people, Brad Schoenfeld, a couple of other big names in researching, that goes through some of the more effective models. Again, there can be a model that's super effective for one individual and completely dysfunctional for another. It depends on your lifestyle, your goals, everything like that as well. But it is certainly an interesting read if you're looking to do your own programming as well. Good. Next, we're on to variables. There will be a video every Tuesday, so make sure you hit the subscribe button. There's a little bell next to it as well to make sure you get notifications for when that video goes live. There will be a few videos that we do after variables as well in terms of nutrition and things like that. If you've got any suggestions for topics you want me to talk about, drop them down in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one.